Look, we've just come off discussing how maybe the equation of what is profitable in AI infrastructure here in the US is changing. How much does the abandonment of AI diffusion rule help or hinder those sorts of maths?
Well, the diffusion rules being mitigated by the Trump administration was an important step forward because, quite honestly, they didn't make any sense to limit the technology to go to a wide swath of countries that really, in many cases, were our friends, not foe. And so the question is, what comes next?
Yeah.
And what are the rules that they will put in place to hold the strategic kind of lead that they perceive?
What's interesting is, as you say, countries that were deemed allies, Israel, India, suddenly on a tier 2 level, not as able to access as many sophisticated chips as they'd wanted to. That was the proposed AI diffusion rule. But now we come to this awkwardness where it's going to be sort of a case-by-case basis, country-by-country basis. Malaysia, where Oracle wants to be putting a huge data center, for example. When do we get any clarity on that? And how do you start to see companies and countries navigate it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, they're going to use it almost as a bartering tool in these trade negotiations, and it is a strong bartering tool. I think, however, the administration has to be very careful that we have to look after our own strategic initiatives and own strategy for national security, but we cannot overreach. And in part because there is a very viable competitor with Huawei. We want to pretend that Nvidia is a monopoly. It is not. Huawei has shown an incredible prowess over the last 2 months even. They've introduced these fantastic chips and fantastic racks that in fact do compete with Nvidia. So if we push too far on this, there is an alternative for the Malaysias to move to a different vendor.
So when that argument comes from Jensen Huang that I actually want to not only access Malaysia and Indonesia and, well, most of Southeast Asia, but I also want to sell into China still. Should he be able to?
You know, I do think that we're looking at this in the wrong way, to be completely frank. You know, let's think about DeepSeek. DeepSeek's innovation actually is helping our models. And Facebook is adopting some of the innovation that came out of DeepSeek. So one thing we can't forget is that innovation begets innovation. And you cannot stop that kind of life cycle of innovation. And if we slow innovation in China, we're slowing innovation here as well. So, you know, what I think this should focus on is, in fact, IP theft. So focus on making sure that our IP across the board, not only for GPUs, but any kind of equipment, whether it's robotics or medical equipment, that's not being stolen by the Chinese, right? Instead of kind of fighting over the widgets. So I think we like to think of this as, you know, are you friend or foe, or are you? And perhaps there's some place in the middle where we can't treat China as this enemy of the people when they're really not. They too are innovating at a pace that is probably faster than we are.
So when a CATL is looking to list in Hong Kong and US residing investors aren't able to access that, how does that make you feel as a portfolio manager who wants to be able to thrive in innovation worldwide?
Yeah, frustrating. But you know what is also frustrating? A CATL wanted to build a factory here, you know, a few years ago and was stopped by the Biden administration. They actually wanted to move manufacturing back to the US and weren't able to. So that too is frustrating as an American, to have you know, that the initiatives of bringing manufacturing back of these technologies to the U.S. is being hindered, which hopefully will stop with this administration. I think CATL, you know, us not being able to access it, you know, this too will be overcome, and I think these are hurdles along the way that we'll have to work through with the Chinese and the Trump administration.
Ankur, you were very clear that you did not want the AI diffusion rule and you felt that it was just harming most people in this environment. What then, as a portfolio manager, do you do in this current lack of clarity, the fact that it's going to be a case by case? Do you still think Nvidia will compete, will be able to compete well, will be able to access markets? And you go from the optimistic side of things, do you start to add on in this point?
I think it only makes sense to allow for our technology giant, Nvidia, who, you know, quite honestly, is the pride of our nation at this point, right? They are driving forward the AI revolution. And so I do think that over time, I think by September, we'll have very clear boundary conditions around where we can and what we can or cannot ship.
And IP will be protected, do you think?
And I hope IP will be protected. And I think that's the most important thing here. IP should be protected on a go-forward basis across all industries with a commitment from the Chinese government to make sure that that is in fact the case. Because we can't have this industrial espionage occurring all over throughout many industries. So I feel very optimistic for the rest of the world and for China that we will sort through this because, you know, we are a globalized world. And we can't pull back from that. We can bring manufacturing back here, which I wholeheartedly believe in, but in a controlled way.